welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Spooky Japan Podcast. Irene's not feeling good today, so she won't be joining us. But today, that's okay, because today we do have a repeat guest. I'm sure you may recognize him, JJ from Southern Demonology. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I've been doing pretty good, besides it's a scorcher here. I've been
Yep.
looking I've been looking forward to having you back though, just because you came last time with all the facts, which looking back at how previous episodes have been performing, yours is still one of the top episodes on all platforms.
Given the fact that my voice sounds the way that it does, that is rather surprising, but it's very also good to hear.
I think it's because you came with all the facts and everyone just absolutely loves that. So do you want to go ahead and for anyone out there who may not have caught you last time or not sure who you are, how would you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is JJ. I run as you may tell from the lovely virtual background here, the Southern Demonology podcast, which is a podcast which is available on all major podcasting platforms and YouTube and TikTok. But anyway, I've been in operation since 2017, and the emphasis on the show is really about academic topics, but also delving into the realm of spiritual warfare, exorcism, and delving into some of my experiences in Japan. So, kind of a mixed bag, but it's all fun. And yeah, you can get us at southerndemonology.com, or go in there. We have links to everything that you would ever want. So,
With an actual demonologist, I do like to ask how much education did you have to get to be able to get to that point?
I would say that I am vastly different than any other person out there that claims that moniker. And it's because of the fact that I am really an academic. I am an ancient. I call myself an ancient demonologist, and that's because I really have studied the 14 ancient languages that I needed in order to be able to do this, read the texts in their original forms, actively still translate text to this day. So I got my Master of Theological Studies from Harvard University. So it took, 2 years of that program, 4 years of undergrad, and a heck of a lot of intensive work since then. And yes, even though my day job is a cloud architect and developer, I have been actively working in the field for, gosh, the past 25 years as well. So,
Yeah, I like to ask that because I realize nowadays with in a paranormal field, there's so many people who just kind of like wake up and they're like, I'm going to be a demonologist today. And they take the
yep.
online course for it. And you're like, I have a certificate. I am good. And I'm
Yeah.
like, it
And
doesn't work that way. So that's why I
it
always
does
like to
not.
ask. Yeah.
Absolutely not. You cannot take a weekend retreat and suddenly claim that, you have all of the knowledge in the world, or you cannot participate in a deliverance seminar, or, remote learning class and suddenly go, yep, this is what I am now. No, you're not.
I wish it works that way. Yeah. But yeah, that's always like to ask. So throw out there how much real training or education you had to do just for that reason. I mean, I've gotten curious. 'Cause I know people are like, well, there's nothing wrong with taking a course. I'm like, yeah, but I've also taken online courses just because I was curious, and I can tell you it doesn't even scratch the surface of what you need to know to be a demonologist. So that's also why I like to ask ones who actually studied or actually put in a lot of the training for it for that reason. Because I'm like, yeah, it from someone who's done it, I can definitely say who's earned that certificate. That I'm like, yeah, there's no way it's even close to the knowledge that you need.
I mean, to me, I'm in the tech world. So a great example of this would be someone who is wanting to learn how to build web applications. Say they attend a 6 week or a 14-week long boot camp as a crash course in the technologies that you need in order to do that. That's great, but when you get out, you're still only going to know a tiny modicum of the entire field. You're going to be the most junior of all junior developers that are out
Mhm.
there. Not saying it's not a good foundation, but what I am saying is that it in no way, shape, or form really prepares you for the job market that you're about to get into, and you will have a very abrupt awakening
Mhm.
once you do start to do that. So,
Yeah, and you're gonna think that you know everything until all of a sudden you're actually in a case, and you realize, and a lot of people don't realize this, especially if you go to a residential, you can make the haunting worse.
yep.
You can make it worse. Even if it's not a demon, you can make it worse because I've heard of so many stories from people where they invited a team in who are just like, "Yeah, we know what we're doing. We have a demonologist on with us." It's one of those, course ones or one who's read one book and they're like, "I'm good." And they made the situation worse either by either, and it's usually both, making whatever in there more upset and also adding something to it.
Exactly. And that's true not only when you're dealing with human spirits, but also with, especially with the preternatural world. If you are not exceedingly careful in what you do, then you absolutely can make mistakes and you will make things worse. And even, and especially when you're dealing with the world of exorcism, it's
Mhm.
not like Hollywood films where you go in, you do something once, and suddenly you're all done, everything is wrapped up, and then the credits begin to roll. It takes multiple applications in order to, even as something as simple, because there are two types of exorcism. There are exorcisms of place, and then there's exorcisms of person. Both require the authority of the church in order for them to even be remotely possible in succeeding. If you have that, then if you go into a situation where you're trying to do an exorcism of place or locale, it's hardly ever a one and done. In fact, I am very good friends now with an exorcist who is out of Georgia, and he's been on my show quite a few times. My latest episodes are around, and it's divided into two parts because it's rather lengthy, but it goes through his and his son's experience in trying to rid a house of a generational curse
Mhm.
brought on by the demonic. And it is hair raising, some of the stuff that is described during those encounters. And so far, they've gone out twice, and they still haven't gotten everything covered due to some extenuating circumstances. So more is going to be needed. Um, I wish it was as simple as going in and, rubbing some sage around and everything's just golden again. It's nothing like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny how many people online also reach out to people, and it's the fake people that always reach out and always say, "I see you have a generational curse, and if you don't pay me money to get rid of it, it's gonna kill you and your whole entire family." And it's like, okay.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're ever having if you ever see money enter into the equation, you're in for a very bad time.
Yeah, that's I think I've noticed. I'm like, what was the point in reaching out for this? How many people fall for that though?
Oh, a lot because they are in true. I mean, a lot of these individuals are in truly desperate need, and even if you're not at that point where things are all going horribly, horribly wrong, you may you can easily find a family or an individual who they're beginning to question their sanity
Mm,
because they have all of these strange things happening to them and they cannot explain it. And I have often gone into consultations with people that fit this mold exactly, and they feel lost. And I never charge a dime for anything that I do because that's not my goal. I didn't get into this particular line of work to enrich my bank account. That's what I have my day job for, and it provides for me and my family perfectly fine. I do this because I have always felt like it was a calling. And I do not have the authority of the church, and I will never claim that I do. I am not a priest. So all I do is provide consultation. And
mm,
then I do have friends that do can get of that kind of authority. And then I will then call them as backup if the situation truly deserves it. But you have to know your limits and you have to know what you don't know. And when it comes to this stuff, there is so much we simply do not know. I mean, you can't even fill a thimble of what is known as to the entirety of the unknown that is out there. Probably a weird way of saying that, but
So when you do a consultation and someone needs a cleansing done in their house, do you go by their religion or how do you do that?
so yeah, I never mix in a religious agenda. Um, I will say that the only way that I know to help protect people is through the lens of my own faith. And so I will tell them the things that I recommend them to do. And I will often preface that by saying, as long as you do not feel uncomfortable doing this, these are the things that I would recommend. So I'm not there to convert people. I'm not there on a mission trip. I don't want to make other people Catholic. I mean, if other individuals suddenly start believing the same things that I do, then I would begin to feel very sorry for them. That's not my goal in this. But I do know that there are things that I have seen that have truly worked for me and for others. And that is what I go with. I go for the old tried and true. Um, and I am definitely not a paranormal investigator. I have many friends who are. They have hours and hours and hours in the field. They know what they're doing. I am more of as I said, I am an academic. I love spending my time with ancient documents and wearing, kid gloves and imaging things and then building systems that will do the translations for me. But at the same time, I have been touched by the demonic. I know others have. And if there's ever any kind of advice to give, then I am more than happy to give it.
That's good. Yeah, that's good advice because I know some people try and go with their religion. Some people say, "Look, honestly, I don't know your religion. Here's what I do. and if they believe it's gonna work, they said more likely it's gonna work.
Yep.
But if it's one of those things where they absolutely are like, I don't believe in what you're telling me to do, I don't think it's gonna work, then it's not gonna work. And then unfortunately you're just not a good fit and they're gonna have to find someone who is a little bit more of their religious base. Like here in Japan, as you know, it's either Shinto or mostly Buddhism. So when I tell people sage, you can't really buy sage here because sage means absolutely nothing to them. So if you tell people sage your house, it's like it's the equivalent if I went to you and told you to go pick some dandelions and light them on fire and use the smoke to cleanse your house. You'd be like, yeah, okay, sure.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, every like, and for example, if I was ever speaking to someone from Japan, I would probably be couching things much more in terms of Shintoism. There are very successful jinjas out there that they specialize in helping rid people from attachments, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's perfectly beautiful. So yeah, I will never force an agenda, even though I think that, for example, the prayer to Saint Michael is a very simple and elegant prayer that can help. So are quite a few others. Um, if you don't believe in that, then yeah, like you said, it's absolutely not going to have an effect.
Yeah, one thing people also don't realize about demonology, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I guess it's so central knowledge base. Like yours is different from, I guess, a different kind of demonology teaching. Because I was asking other demonologists, questions to ask you. They were like, I wouldn't even know myself what to ask them. So I'm not sure of the ancient demons. Is what you say that you kind of specialize in?
Yeah, because all of my stuff is really academic in nature. So like, for example, when I was in school, my emphasis was on the Second Temple Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls and other items that are related to that. And so when you come to Second Temple Judaism, I mainly focused in the more strange texts that you would find in the Pseudepigrapha, which it literally translated from Latin means false epitaphs, and it is the work that essentially falls between, say, 300 BCE to right around, it could go up to 300 CE, but usually it's much earlier than that.
Mhm.
And yeah, like, and normally these are books that were written in order to try to explain from a position of false authority a lot of open questions that you would find within the Hebrew Bible. For example, Genesis 6 is a huge one. When the sons of God came down, what does that mean? Even though a lot of texts nowadays will translate that as angels, that's not really what it means. And you have quite a few different texts that were written in order to examine that statement. And you get such weird and wonderful work such as First Enoch and the Book of Jubilees that during the Second Temple period of time were considered to be canonical texts. So these are not, oddball things that were written. These are things in which a lot of that period scholars, priests, and even early Christians were very familiar with, and some even like truly believe that this was the word. So, and you get a lot of weird and wonderful stuff in this time period. For example, um, let me quote you a simple passage. This is from 4Q, 5, 10, and 11. And what that string of odd numbers and letters means is that this was found in Cave 4 of Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were located, and their fragments 5, 10, and 11. And it reads, "And I, the instructor, the Mashkil, am making a proclamation of his, God's, glorious splendor in order to instill dread and to terrify all of the spirits of the angels of destruction." And this refers specifically to the watchers that you find in First Enoch. The spirits of the bastards, meaning the giants, the Nephilim, um, demons, Lilith, howlers, desert dwellers, and those who suddenly strike in suddenness to lead and astray and establish spirit and to charm hearts. You get like you come from a text like the Hebrew Bible, which had only one word for demon, and even it was an extremely minor one, sha'ir, which is more like a goat thing. Um, and suddenly you come into a period in which there is an explosion of angelology and demonology, and it's just, yeah, it's beautiful.
I didn't even know for the longest time angelology was a thing until recently.
Oh yeah, it
'Cause I feel like
is.
I should have known it should have been a thing too, but it's nothing. It's because no one really wants to study angelology or be the angelologist, which I like I said I didn't know until recently was a thing.
It's yeah, it's actually rather huge because you get so much variance in Second Temple Judaism. And the weird and wonderful thing is about this particular time period is a lot of these ideas that you find in Second Temple Judaism, they are essentially flash frozen, and they inform a lot of the Western viewpoint of all of these different things, whether it's magic, whether it is how demons operate, how angels are. And we're not mixing in like the Victorian time periods in which you get cherubs that have or little babies with wings and they pose idyllically in front of flowers and windowsills. None of that stuff. But the more terrifying, all of that really comes from this period and truly informs it. And you can get so much insight not only into how Judaism and Christianity and a lot of these other more ancient religions work, but also how they inform us in the present day. And it's just it's amazing.
See, I do study basic demonology, and it's interesting how many different theories everyone has from each other. Like some people think that the angels fell after Adam and Eve came to Earth. And they said it wasn't a popular belief until the 16th or 17th century that the angels fell before Adam and Eve.
Yeah, it and the problem is especially when you're dealing with a lot of Protestantism is that you get a lot of murkiness involved in all of this because and this is not a slant against any religious denomination by any stretch of the word because I
Mm.
did I am not that kind of person. But what I'm saying is that whenever you have Milton into the mix, his poems become almost indistinguishable from that they become indistinguishable from viewpoints that would exist outside of it. And it's really hard to kind of disentangle a lot of this stuff. And honestly, there's not a ton of clear answers when it comes to this. And you need to go to some of these extra sources that you will find in order to glean any kind of insights. Like for example, did you know that what we think of as the devil wasn't who we thought it was for the longest time? There was a
I've
period
heard
in
of that.
300 years in which Judaism began questing for who the enemy is. And that is because ancient Judaism, it wasn't dualistic. There wasn't God and some enemy that was out there. It was just God. There is no rival. There is nothing. And suddenly, after the first temple was destroyed, then the people were scattered through the Babylonian exile, and the Jewish people came into contact with Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism has perhaps the greatest ancient dualism that existed, because you had Ahura Mazda, who is the god, and then you had Ahriman, who was his evil counterpart, but lesser in nature. And there's a scene in one of the Gethas in which you have Ahura Mazda, who's in the realm of light, and then you have Ahriman, who is in the realm of darkness. And Ahriman crawls to the edge, and he sees what's outside of the darkness. And he is slow and not very intelligent, but powerful. And he looks out and he sees everything that Ahura Mazda has created, and he wants it, and he wants more than what he has.
Mhm.
And so he essentially challenges Ahura Mazda, and of course, the God of Light knows he's going to win in the end. It doesn't matter what happens. And so, he actually tries to take it easy on the devil, and Akrima will have none of it. He creates devas, which are demons, in order to aid him, and in a line which is very reminiscent to what we think of as the devil nowadays. You have Ahriman snarling at Ahura Mazda, saying, I will turn your creatures against you, and I will make them hate you. And that, if you cannot equate that to modern or even ancient Christianity, then I don't know what will. I mean, it's almost ripped word for word for what you find of what we think of as the devil nowadays. And after this exposure, and I'm not trying to go on for too long, I don't want to make your eyes glaze over, but um, you have um, you have these people going, well, you know what? We think the world is about to end. We had our first temple just destroyed. Our temple just destroyed. It housed ancient knowledge that we no longer have. This must mean that everything has gone to heck and nothing is going to survive. So that means that there must be an enemy out there who is trying to ruin and bring the world to an end. And so they began searching, and there were more than a dozen candidates that were thrown up from various different religious traditions and books of the Torah, until they finally cemented upon Satan, who is that's not even a real character. But we won't get into that. So
Yeah, it's always interesting the different theories that there is. And I do like to look into different conspiracy theories. I'm not ever saying I believe in all of them, but it's interesting to kind of just learn about, just because you never know what some people believe when you meet them. This way, it's just better to have a conversation. Like,
oh
oh yeah,
yeah,
I've heard of what you're talking about. Here's what I know. Maybe you know a little bit more.
yep. Trust me, engaging in dialogue and helping to it's never with you're never out to try to prove someone wrong.
Yeah,
You're always hoping just to make the situation better. And if there is misinformation that's being thrown into the mix, trying to dissuade. Is it always possible? Heck no. I would be an idiot if I said that it could. But still, if you can spread a little bit of light, a little bit of joy, go about your day, then, what more could you ask for?
that is one thing that I will say with the paranormal is my theory might not be right, your theory might not be right. You don't actually know.
Yep,
That's just this is also why you shouldn't be telling people they're wrong or trying to prove them wrong or you're like, no, that's not right. Because it's like you actually don't really know.
exactly. Unfortunately. Like and especially when you're dealing with the world of the demonic or the
Mhm.
preternatural, because where can you really get this information from?
Yeah,
It's either you're getting it from documents that are over 2,000 years old and we only have partially preserved, or if you're looking for more modern sources, then the thing that you turn to are the demons themselves. And if Catholicism teaches anything correctly, you never, ever, ever engage in conversation with the demonic because they never have your best interest at heart, ever. Their goal is to putrefy and to corrupt us. And that's all there is to it. So, yeah. And so there's no real good basis for information about this. It's either you go from ancient text and you try to learn as much as you can and you glean while also separating out the theories and the fake things. But then there's such a plethora of it floating around nowadays, especially with the explosion of social media. People that are pretending to know more or putting on airs that they simply do not have in order to gain the money from engagement or to win imaginary internet points. And so the job of education becomes all this much more important because you've got to attempt to stem the tide as much as you possibly can.
it's amazing how much social media has changed demonology and the paranormal in general, especially like recently. The more social media it is, the more it definitely it's changing.
Oh, yeah. And, for every genuine tell that you find out there are hundreds of people espousing BS theories or they're staging videos with fishing lines and pulling furniture around in order to try to make, these top 10 lists out there. And it's just, oh gosh, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, I'm trying not to lament too much about
No, I know what you mean because unfortunately, because I tell people, obviously being out here in Japan, I see what the Japanese are getting in far, in terms of American videos, especially in the paranormal. Unfortunately, the ones that are mostly making out here are so obviously fake where you can see the string moving or you can tell it was a window like, why do I hear my voice in the next room? And it's clearly you recorded your voice on something, it's playing on a stereo. This is what's being shown out here. So this is also why the younger generation out here is less likely to believe it over the older generation, just because the older generation wasn't used to the social media thing, so their opinion wasn't adapted from what they saw on social media. But this is also why now younger generation are just like, yeah, I don't believe it just because of the fact, like I said, unfortunately, the majority of videos they're getting are ones that are clearly, obviously fakes, just hoping to get the views and the likes. And it's like, I wish you people would stop it.
exactly. Well, that and there can be such a disconnect between how the West views the paranormal and how the East does. Because, and you can tell me if you think differently, but at least in my mind, the way that Japan views the world of the paranormal is with a lot more fear and dread
Mhm.
because you know, at least in the West, you can encounter something paranormal and walk away unscathed. And that is not true when you're dealing with, power spotto or whatever else that, you're going to. If you do the wrong thing wrong, then you're never coming out again. And that
Mhm.
could be a best case scenario. So,
Yeah. That is one thing that we tell people over here at the paranormal is it is extremely different over here compared to over in America. Because when I first got here, I was so excited. Like, I'm going to jump in a paranormal community in Japan. I'm going to go see haunted places and investigate. I can't wait. Then I get out here and I soon learn there is no paranormal community. There is no place you can go book for investigations. And it's more of a they do kind of approach it more with kids' gloves, where they're if it's considered haunted, more than likely it's gonna be boarded up, so no one can enter. And it's more of a I think it's a fear for them, like, they don't know how to handle an angry spirit besides building a shrine to them. And there's places in Tokyo where they wish they could tear down some shrines because they're older and now they're in more prime real estate locations, but it's taboo because they believe once you tear it down, you're just gonna make that spirit it was made for angry and bad luck is gonna come to you. 'Cause they
yep.
tried doing it to one of the shrines you're dedicated to one. 'Cause they're like, "It's in the prime office location, we're gonna tear it down so we can build more offices." They took it down, and then they said, like, people started, getting bad luck, and so they put the shrine back up thinking, "Okay, hopefully this is gonna appease it, this is what's gonna solve the issue."
Oh, yeah. In fact, I think the world's most expensive piece of undeveloped real estate is in the heart of Tokyo, and it is a shrine to a very famous shogunate leader. And the Japanese government, in combination with the U.S. military, tried to destroy it back in 1950s, and they had two bulldozers flip over. They had quite a few different people die, and they called it off. They're like, nope, it is simply not worth it. And so, yeah, there are millions of dollars, I mean, almost trillions of dollars now with the Nikkei and the shape that it's in, which could be harvested from this, and yet the respect is simply too much. And that's
Yeah,
one thing that I utterly respect about Japan.
yeah, and I realized that 'cause when I started learning about the urban legends here. That's the one thing I learned is that, there's a lot of shrines built to a lot of them, and then they try and take it down, and then as soon as bad luck hits, they're just like, "Oh, the spirit must be angry," so they rebuild the shrine.
Oh, and I tell you, even when, like where my family lives in Nishi, Tokyo, we have this one of the most beautiful things is the Green Road. And it's this massive walking path and bicycling path that stretches through 4 or 5 different neighboring towns, and you can walk for hours, and it's just some of the most beautiful scenery. And also along these paths, you will find these tiny little shrines built to local kami. They're not jinjas, they're just tiny little like Jinzo statues that line the paths, and people leave donations all the time. And you do not mess with these things because
Right.
really bad things will happen. And this is not just superstition. I mean, yeah, so you leave well enough alone, and I'm telling you, the one and I shared the same kind of sentiment that you did. When I first got to Japan, almost immediately booked a trip with some friends to go to, Okigahara. So I was dying to go after hearing so many things, and after spending 20 minutes there, I was so scared out of my mind that I made everyone leave. I went, "Nope." They're like, "We just drove hours to be here, and you want to go now?" I said, "You damn right I do. Let's go." And yeah, and I took it so much more. I treated everything there so much more respectfully as a result.
I've been nervous about going in there myself just because of the things that I've heard about it. Like, there is that theory that once you enter, it's pretty much like the Blair Witch where you c no, even if you walk straight and walk straight back, you're gonna somehow get lost and never find the
That
end of the forest
that
anymore.
did not happen to me, thank God. But so, we saw a few of the lava caves and the ice caves that are in that area,
Mhm,
and those are beautiful. And then we get to the forest itself. We park in because a friend rented a car. We parked in one of the parking lots. You enter into the forest, and due to the ground and the massive trees, you instantly are enveloped by silence after entering the tree line. And it's absolute. But from the moment I walked in, I could hear this strange hum, and it
mhm.
would just come in waves. And the entire time I was there, this thing just kept getting louder and louder to the point where I mean, I had chills up and down my spine the entire time, and I couldn't take it. And I asked my friends, "Do," because I had 5 other people there with me, "Do you hear anything?" And they go, "No, I don't hear anything." And I am not a super sensitive person by any stretch of the word. I don't have great hearing. I definitely am not sensitive to, I'm not a psychic. I'm not anything like that. And yet I heard this, and I don't know, it's just the time growing up in the backwoods of Tennessee or what it may have been, but I was so scared. I knew that we should not be there.
Yeah,
Um,
I heard the bad part of that forest does mind tricks on you too. That's why if you're going there to consider doing doing what a lot of people go there to do, they're more likely it's going to hype that up, and you're gonna find yourself wanting to do it more.
oh yeah, I mean the Jukin is just and then the people that they don't find the courage to do it immediately, and so they camp out and they stay there for a week or more until they finally come to that decision, and the decision is almost always to do it. Just I mean, the place is just so filled with despair and sadness and hatred that it's almost like that has seeped into the very ground itself. Um, yeah, I will never forget the place, and I will never go back. Um,
But what's funny about that forest is obviously, like I said, I get a lot of Japanese videos too, where there's some people that say there's the bad part of that forest, which you've seen, but there's also somewhere else they call it the better part of the forest because and people and locals will hike it daily because it is the exact opposite feeling. They know where to hike. They said it's beautiful, it's serene, it makes you feel peaceful, and like I said, they know where to hike, and they like, you want to keep on this path. When it gets to the fork, you want to stay on the right because if you go to the left, that leads you to the part of the forest you don't want to go into. So that's what I
Oh, I
always found
can
interesting.
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's a 32-kilometer diameter forest. Everything can't be bad.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so I mean that makes total sense to me. And if I knew exactly where to go and I had a guide to go there, I would be happy to go explore some of those places.
to the
But
better part. Yeah,
without that, there's no way in heck.
there is also a theory with demons that, and I recently learned about this one. There is a small group that believe that demons didn't actually come from fallen angels, but the descendants of the Nephilim.
No.
And this
Yeah,
is what
I have heard this theory all too well. So this comes from First Enoch, and really it's more the Book of Jubilees. Because what happened is what's described. Because so First Enoch is divided into um, five different chapters essentially, and the first one is the Book of the Watchers. So, in the very beginning, when humans began to populate upon the land, God sent a group of angels, which he dubbed the Watchers, down to look over them. And as these angels were watching, they saw that the daughters of man, and I'm not being sexist, I'm just using the terms here.
yeah, that's the term used.
Yeah. So they saw that the daughters of men were extremely comely, and they decided to go and take wives for them amongst them. And they bound themselves in a curse. And this is the actual, like, technical verbiage that you find in the classical Ethiopic version. They bound themselves in a curse so that they would not go against one another, so you didn't have any tattletales that would go, well, I really didn't want to, but they made me. And then they all went down and they did this. And while they were copulating with the daughters of humanity, they were also teaching people the sacred arts. So everything from weaponsmithing to astrology to magic to makeup. Yeah, I know makeup is one of the deadly sins according to them, but it is what it is. And and then the result of the copulation resulted in the Nephilim, the giants. And these giants then began to sin against everything on the earth. So they would not only devour whatever they could get their hands on, but they would also copulate with everything they could get their hands on. And there is a portion of a Greek version of the first Enoch, which goes on to say that the Nephilim then created the Iliad, which is a offshoot of the Nephilim. And the Book of Jubilees, all of them have a reference that the Iliad were created by the Nephilim. I do not particularly believe in any of this, and the reason why is that in First Enoch, the chaos grew so horribly bad from the Watchers and from the Nephilim that God heard the screams and the cries and the chaos and sent four of his archangels down in order to remedy the situation. He sent down Gabriel or Gabriel, the mighty warrior of God, Michael, who is Mikael, who is like God, Raphael, which is the healing power of God, and Uriel, the light of God. He sent these down, and each one of these angels had a task. It was Gabriel's job in order to send the giants into battle against one another. And so they were all killed. And then it was Raphael's job in order to purge the earth and erase the wrongs by sending the flood, the deluge. The problem is that the Nephilim are such an abhorrent mixture of spirit and flesh that even after the deluge and being, forced to kill each other, their spirits are still roaming around in the atmosphere. And if you go by the book of Jubilees, then it's 10% of the watchers are still around. Let's get into technicalities. So, but no, at least according to First Enoch, the Nephilim, they're all spirits and they're all bound into the atmosphere because they simply cannot die. And then you have the Watchers who were bound hand and foot and put into the desert Dudael. And every once in a while, then they can escape and wreak havoc upon the earth. But no, demons are truly bad angels because even in ancient Judaism, another idea was that there was an angel that led each of the 70 nations. And then this idea came about of, well, if there's an angel that is leading Israel, which is Israel, and then you have the other 69 nations that are beating up on us, then that must mean that there are bad angels out there. And that's another idea in which you get this kind of, bad angel theory going on. So,
That's an interesting thing. So how would you say ho the perception of demons, how do you think it's changed from way back when until what is believed now?
um, I would say you get a lot. So I would say that a lot of the core that you had is still there, and that's because only a few different organizations and people truly kind of examine this in the light of day. However, there's been a lot of evolution that branches out and you get, different perspectives. So, before there was there was Judaism and Catholicism, and then Catholicism split into Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And then you get, Protestantism that kind of exploded out as well. You get, very different concepts to even some basic interpretations to biblical passages. And, I think the one that a lot of at least US individuals may think of is, the passage where it says that you can handle snakes. And now you have people in, certain southern states which are actually picking up snakes and drinking poison, thinking it's going to take care of everything. That's one interpretation. But then you also get some really interesting concepts out of both Coptic Orthodoxy and Ethiopic Orthodoxy. And when it comes to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, that is some fascinating stuff. And I have a lot of different episodes about this, but you have Debtera, this certain class of priests that will sit there and they will slaughter a goat. They will capture a demon by luring it out with wine and eggs, and then they will bind it into a scroll with not only biblical text, but also iconography, especially the Seal of Solomon. And then they'll use that demonic force in order to fuel God's will. So when Christ said, "I give unto you the power um, to cause out demons," the church takes that extremely highly, and very literally. And in fact, I mean, to the Ethiopians, Christ was not only the Messiah, but he was also the greatest magician that ever lived. And in fact, you get this fascinating tale in the Kebra Nagesh, the glory of the kings, where Christ is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and the demon Nadada erupts out of the water, and she throws her head back and shoots a column of flame 384 cubits into the air. And Christ then looks at her, says a magical incantation, waves his hand, and she is then banished down into the waters once again. A lot of fascinating stories about all that.
There's always fascinating stories with them. So would you say, and I've always wondered this, there's some people believe that Lilith started out as Adam's first wife?
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that within Genesis, you really have two different creation stories. You have a vestigial one that appears at the beginning, where man and woman were created at the same time. And then you have another one in which man was created first and then woman from a portion of him, right? Um, and so the theory that erupted much later is that, oh, well, that vestigial creation story must have meant that Adam had a first wife, and then she did not want to serve him, so she then flew off and then became a demon and blah blah blah. But that's not where the story of Lilith began, and it's a heck of a lot more interesting. So in the Akkadian religion, you had three different wind goddesses. You had Lilu, Lilith, and Wada Lilith, and these goddesses grew to be very distinct, and especially that last one, Wada Lili, she became kind of a symbol of, and she essentially would wander the streets appearing as an underaged girl with wanton sexuality to tempt men into having inappropriate relations with her. And so she became the symbol for wanton sexuality. It makes me gross just even recounting that. But anyway, it's not my idea, thank God.
Yeah.
Um, and especially with all of the horrible stories that you read nowadays, it's just, ugh. Anyway, um, but you get this entire spread of ideas because this idea of a wanton figure gets adopted into Jewish lore as a night hag. And if you look at like the book of Isaiah, for example, you get the desert Dudael in which all of the bad things live. And one of them is Lilith. And it is just this generic term for a nightly ghost, essentially, that would then prey upon humanity. And it's not until much later do you have this idea that Lilith is a singular entity that then, goes off and becomes the consort to the enemy. So, yeah, it's just I have an entire episode on Lilith. She's an absolutely fascinating figure. Same thing with like some other imports, like Pazuzu or Lamashtu or any of those. They're all fascinating in terms of their evolution.
I do always find it interesting, but I also find it interesting the different variations that you hear from these things too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You get people that only are familiar with the demonic story of Lilith and how she's a great, feminine figure, and I can understand that, especially if that's the sole encompassment of your knowledge about it. But if you go back further, the story becomes much more convoluted. In fact, I wish that we could pinpoint down exactly, the exact time frames as to when these things, when those shifts in thinking occurred. But
Mhm.
we know when it comes to the demonic side of Lilith, that wasn't until after the Midrash and etc. So it was definitely much, much later.
That is an interesting that I like I said, I just find it I always find it so interesting with that. So if people wanna hear more of your episodes, where can they do that?
Yeah, so go to southern You can find us, all of the episodes are there. But if you are also on every podcasting platform, so you can search for us on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you get your podcast. Or if you prefer YouTube, then it's also up on YouTube. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, I love talking to you because you always come with new facts. That's why I love talking to you, is I always learn something new.
Well, trust me,
But,
I have always enjoyed our conversations, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come back and speak with you again.
I will be bothering you to keep coming back, so don't
Please
worry.
do. Always happy to.
And thank you so much for joining us today, I appreciate it. Or
Oh,
joining
it's
me
my
today, I'm
pleasure.
sorry. Joining me today, I'm so used to Irene. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Anytime.
Alright. And everyone, thank you so much. But everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye, y'all.